Your decision to maintain no contact after the avoidant person hurt you, ended things, or created unbearable distance has created something unexpected and powerful. Their respect for you has increased dramatically, possibly reaching levels it never reached while you were together and available. This respect is not the kind that translates into changed behavior or increased capacity for relationship. It's not respect that means they're suddenly ready to show up differently or that they've done work to address their patterns. It's a specific kind of respect that avoidant people reserve for those who demonstrate they cannot be controlled, manipulated, or taken for granted. For those who value themselves enough to walk away from situations that don't serve them. For those who prove through action that they will not tolerate poor treatment or wait indefinitely for someone who cannot meet their needs. The avoidant person respected you to some degree when you were together, but that respect was contaminated by their ability to take you for granted, by their knowledge that you would tolerate their patterns, by their sense that you needed them more than they needed you. Your availability, your pursuit, your willingness to accept breadcrumbs, all of these reduced their respect, even as they benefited from these behaviors. But your absence, your refusal to chase, your maintenance of boundaries that keep them out of your life, these have forced a fundamental shift in how they perceive you. They now see you as someone who cannot be trifled with, someone who has standards and enforces them, someone who valued themselves enough to leave when the relationship wasn't working, someone strong enough to stay gone despite whatever feelings might remain. This respect manifests in how they think about you, how they speak about you to others, how they compare subsequent partners to you, and in the grudging admiration they feel for your strength in staying away. But here's the critical truth you must understand. This respect exists precisely because you're maintaining no contact, because you stayed away, because you proved you meant it when you left. The moment you break no contact, the moment you reach back out, the moment you demonstrate that you're still available or still hoping, you destroy the very foundation of this respect. You confirm their belief that you can be taken for granted, that your boundaries were negotiable, that you'll always be there regardless of how they treat you. Why your absence created respect when they never showed it when you were available? The avoidant person's respect for you has increased substantially since you've been gone. Understanding why your absence created respect that your presence never commanded reveals fundamental truths about avoidant psychology and about the dynamics that characterized your relationship while it existed. This shift in their perception is not mysterious or unpredictable. It follows clear psychological patterns related to how avoidants value what they cannot access and devalue what they can, how they respond to power dynamics, and how they interpret boundaries and self-respect. When you were available and pursuing the relationship, when you were investing heavily and tolerating their patterns, the avoidant person's respect for you was diminished by several factors that your presence and pursuit inevitably created. First, your availability made you seem less valuable in their perception. Avoidant people have a distorted relationship to scarcity and availability, where they value what's scarce or hard to access and take for granted what's readily available. This is not a conscious preference or deliberate cruelty. It's an automatic psychological response rooted in their attachment wounds, where closeness triggers anxiety and distance triggers longing. When you were there, consistently available, expressing your care and investment, the avoidant person's system registered your availability as low value because available things don't trigger their chase response or their fear of loss. Your pursuit of them when they withdrew, while a completely understandable and natural response to someone you cared about creating distance, actually reduced their respect because it communicated that you needed them more than they needed you, that the power dynamic favored them, that they could treat you poorly and you would still be there. The avoidant person, operating from a place of deep insecurity, masked by defensive superiority, needs to feel that they have power and control in their relationships. Your pursuit gave them that power. They could withdraw and you would chase. They could be inconsistent and you would tolerate it. They could offer breadcrumbs and you would accept them. This dynamic while allowing the relationship to continue longer than it should have, fundamentally undermined their respect for you because they saw your tolerance as weakness rather than as love or commitment. Your willingness to tolerate their patterns, to accept less than you deserved, to accommodate their limitations without demanding they do better, communicated to the avoidant person that you had low standards or low self-worth. This is a harsh assessment, and it's not a fair or accurate evaluation of why you tolerated their behavior. You likely tolerated their patterns because you cared about them, because you understood they were wounded, because you believed in the relationship's potential, because you were trying to be patient and understanding. These are admirable qualities rooted in empathy and commitment. But the avoidant person, filtered through their own defensive framework, interpreted your tolerance differently. They saw someone who would accept mistreatment, who didn't value themselves enough to demand better, who could be taken for granted because you weren't going anywhere regardless of how they behaved. Your emotional availability and vulnerability, your willingness to express your feelings and needs, while healthy and appropriate behavior in relationships, was perceived by the avoidant person as neediness or emotional excess that they could judge as inferior to their own emotional control. The avoidant person has an inverted relationship to emotions where suppression and disconnection are seen as strength, and expression and connection are seen as weakness. When you express that you miss them, that you wanted more from the relationship, that you were hurt by their withdrawal, they saw this as you being too emotional, too needy, too demanding. This perception reduced their respect, even though your emotional expression was healthy and their emotional suppression was dysfunctional. But your absence has completely shifted all of these dynamics in ways that force the avoidant person to reevaluate their perception of you. Your absence means you're no longer available, which automatically increases your value in their system. They cannot access you, cannot contact you, cannot see you, cannot have you back easily or perhaps at all. This inaccessibility triggers their fear of loss and their tendency to value what they cannot have. Suddenly, you're not the readily available person they could take for granted. You're the person who is gone, who removed yourself, who they might never have access to again. This shift from availability to scarcity dramatically increases how valuable you seem to them and therefore how much they respect you. Your refusal to chase them, your maintenance of no contact even when it must be difficult, communicates strength and self-respect that the avoidant person cannot help but notice and admire. They expected you to pursue. Their pattern across many relationships has probably been that when they withdraw, others chase, and eventually they return and the cycle continues. But you broke that pattern. You didn't chase. You didn't beg them to come back. You didn't try to convince them to give the relationship another chance. You simply left and stayed gone. This behavior demonstrates that you have boundaries, that you value yourself, that you won't tolerate being treated poorly, all qualities that the avoidant person respects, even though they couldn't honor those qualities through their behavior when you were together. Your no contact demonstrates that you meant what you said or implied when you left or when things ended. Many people say they're done, express anger or hurt, threaten to leave, but then don't follow through. They return, they soften, they give more chances. The avoidant person learns from these experiences that words don't mean much, that boundaries are negotiable, that people will ultimately tolerate their patterns. But you proved different. Your actions align with your words or with the natural consequence of their behavior. You left and you stayed gone, proving you're not someone who makes empty threats or who lacks follow-through. This consistency between what you said or implied and what you did creates respect because it demonstrates integrity and strength. Your absence forces the avoidant person to confront what they lost rather than taking you for granted. When you were there, they could focus on the aspects of the relationship or of you that they found uncomfortable or incompatible. They could emphasize the ways you wanted too much or were too emotional. They could minimize your positive qualities because those qualities were always accessible. But now that you're gone, they're experiencing the absence of what you provided. They're noticing what they miss. They're recognizing qualities in you that they didn't fully appreciate when you were available. This belated recognition of your value creates respect that didn't exist before because they didn't value what they had until they lost it. The avoidant person's respect for you now also includes grudging admiration for the fact that you're apparently doing fine without them, whether or not you're actually fine. The fact that you're maintaining no contact communicates that you're strong enough to move forward, that you're not falling apart without them, that you have enough going on in your life that you don't need to reach out to them. This perceived strength and independence are qualities the avoidant person values highly. And seeing them in you creates respect they didn't have when they viewed you as more dependent on or attached to them. What changed in their perception when you proved you weren't waiting? The most significant shift in the avoidant person's perception of you occurred when they realized you weren't waiting for them, that you had genuinely moved on or at least moved forward, that you weren't sitting by the phone hoping they'd reach out, that you weren't organizing your life around the possibility of their return. This realization forced a fundamental recalibration of how they see you and how they evaluate what happened between you, creating respect rooted in their recognition that you are not the person they thought you were when the relationship was active. When the relationship ended or when distance was created, the avoidant person likely assumed, based on your behavior during the relationship and based on their past experiences with others, that you would wait for them. They expected that you would remain available as an option they could return to if and when they decided they wanted to reconnect. They might not have consciously articulated this expectation, but it existed as a background assumption that gave them comfort and a sense of control. They could walk away knowing that you'd probably be there if they changed their mind. This assumption allowed them to maintain their patterns without fear of permanent loss. Your no contact began dismantling this assumption. The first days or weeks of silence might have been interpreted as you giving them space, as a temporary withdrawal that would end when you couldn't stand it anymore and reached out. But as the silence continued, as days became weeks and weeks became months with no contact from you, the avoidant person began to recognize that something different was happening. You weren't just giving them space, you were actually gone. This recognition was likely shocking and destabilizing because it violated their expectations and their sense of control over the situation. The avoidant person probably tested the waters at some point, either directly by reaching out to see if you would respond, or indirectly by checking your social media, asking mutual friends about you, or putting themselves in situations where you might encounter them. Your continued lack of response, your maintenance of boundaries, your apparent forward movement with your life, all of these communicated clearly that you weren't waiting. You had genuinely moved on, or at least moved into a position where you weren't available to them, regardless of what they wanted or whether they changed their mind about the relationship. This realization that you weren't waiting created several shifts in their perception. First, it forced them to recognize that you actually meant it when you left or accepted the ending. Many people in the avoidant person's life have threatened to leave, have expressed hurt or anger, have created temporary distance, but then come back. The avoidant person learned not to take these threats seriously because they were rarely followed through. But you proved different. You meant it. You left and stayed gone. This follow-through communicated that you're someone who acts with integrity, whose words and actions align, who can be taken at their word. This quality creates respect because the avoidant person, despite their own difficulties with consistency, respects people who are consistent and who follow through on what they say. Second, your refusal to wait communicated that you value yourself enough not to put your life on hold for someone who couldn't show up for you. The avoidant person now sees you as someone with self-respect and standards, someone who requires reciprocity and investment, someone who won't settle for breadcrumbs or for relationships that don't serve them. This self-valuing is incredibly attractive and respect-inducing to avoidant people, even though they were incapable of honoring it through their behavior when you were together. There's a painful irony here. They respect you more for leaving and staying away than they respected you for staying and trying to make things work, revealing that their respect is calibrated to scarcity and boundaries rather than to loyalty and commitment. Third, your apparent ability to move forward without them challenged their assumptions about how important they were to you and how much you needed them while you were together. Your investment and pursuit might have communicated to them that they were essential to your happiness, that you needed them significantly, that losing them would devastate you. But your sustained no contact communicates something different, that you can be fine without them, that you have enough in your life, that their absence doesn't destroy you, that they were perhaps less central to your well-being than they assumed. This recognition is both humbling and respect-inducing for the avoidant person. They're forced to downgrade their assessment of how much power they had over you and to upgrade their assessment of your strength and independence. Fourth, your no contact forced the avoidant person to confront that they were rejected, in a sense that you chose to remove them from your life rather than tolerating their patterns indefinitely. The avoidant person is used to being the one who withdraws, the one who creates distance, the one who has the power to decide whether relationships continue. But your no contact reversed this dynamic. You decided the relationship or connection wasn't acceptable, and you removed yourself. This reversal of the typical power dynamic is disorienting and uncomfortable for the avoidant person. But it also creates respect because it demonstrates that you have agency and standards, and that you won't remain in situations that don't serve you. The avoidant person's perception of you shifted from seeing you as someone they could take for granted, someone who would always be available regardless of how they behaved, to seeing you as someone who is unavailable by choice, someone who has moved on, someone who proved stronger and more resolute than they expected. This shift doesn't mean they suddenly want a relationship with you or that they've developed capacity to show up differently, but it does mean they see you differently, with more respect, with recognition that they underestimated you, with awareness that you're not someone who can be easily dismissed or taken for granted. The increase in their respect does not mean they've developed capacity. Understanding that the avoidant person now respects you more is validating and important, but it's crucial to understand what this respect does and does not mean. Specifically, the increase in their respect for you does not translate into increased capacity for relationship, does not mean they can now show up differently, does not indicate they've done work on their patterns, and does not suggest that reconnecting would result in a different or better outcome than what you experienced before. The respect is real, but it exists in isolation from the fundamental changes that would be necessary for a healthy relationship with them. The avoidant person's respect for you is based primarily on your absence and your boundaries rather than on any change in their own psychology or capacity. They respect you because you left and stayed away, because you proved you couldn't be taken for granted, because you demonstrated strength and self-worth. But this respect doesn't address or change any of the patterns that made the relationship untenable in the first place. They still have the same discomfort with intimacy. They still experience closeness as threatening. They still struggle with emotional expression and vulnerability. They still have limited capacity for sustained presence and commitment. The respect exists, but the limitations that caused the relationship to fail also exist, completely unchanged. In fact, the avoidant person might respect you more now precisely because you're at a safe distance where they don't have to actually deal with the challenges that intimacy with you would create. It's easy to respect someone from afar, to think highly of someone you're not in a relationship with, to admire qualities in someone you don't have to engage with regularly. The respect might exist because you're no longer triggering their intimacy anxiety, because they can idealize you from a distance without having to manage the discomfort that actual closeness created. This means the respect is conditional on your continued absence rather than being a quality that would persist if you reconnected. The avoidant person's respect for you does not indicate they've done any therapeutic work or self-examination about their patterns. Respect is not the same as insight. They can respect your strength and boundaries while remaining completely unaware of their own dysfunction and completely uninterested in changing it. Unless you have concrete evidence that they've been in consistent therapy, working on attachment issues, unless they've demonstrated through actions that they're actively addressing their patterns, unless they can articulate specific work they've done and practices they're implementing, the respect they feel changes nothing about their capacity to be a good partner. The respect also doesn't mean the avoidant person has stopped engaging in their typical patterns with other people. They might respect you more for having left, while simultaneously recreating the same dynamics with new partners who haven't yet learned to respond with no contact. They might think highly of your strength while treating others with the same hot and cold patterns, the same withdrawal, the same inability to commit that characterized their relationship with you. The respect is specific to you and to your response, but their overall patterns with relationships remain unchanged. Crucially, the respect the avoidant person feels now would likely decrease or disappear if you broke no contact and demonstrated availability again. The respect exists because of the specific perception they have of you as someone who left and stayed gone, someone who proved too strong to wait around for them, someone who valued themselves enough not to tolerate their patterns. If you reach back out, if you demonstrate that you're still interested or available, if you give them an opening to reconnect, you immediately contradict the qualities that created their respect. You prove that you actually were waiting, that your boundaries weren't as firm as they appeared, that you can be accessed despite your previous strength in leaving. This revelation would reduce their respect back to levels similar to what existed when you were together and available. The avoidant person might even view your breaking no contact as confirmation of beliefs they had about you during the relationship, that you were more attached or dependent than was healthy, that you couldn't actually move on, that you needed them more than they needed you. They might feel vindicated in their original treatment of you, believing it was justified if you ultimately come back despite how they treated you. This is a deeply unfair interpretation, but it's how the avoidant person's defensive psychology operates. They judge others for the same attachment needs and behaviors that are actually normal and healthy. And they use others' expressions of need or desire for connection as evidence of weakness that justifies their own distancing. The respect the avoidant person feels might also manifest in ways that don't serve you, even if you never break no contact. They might speak highly of you to others while continuing to avoid any real examination of their role in the relationship's failure. They might use you as a standard against which they measure subsequent partners, finding those partners lacking in comparison to you, but still being unable to maintain intimacy with anyone because the problem was never the partners, but rather their own patterns. Their respect for you might become part of their narrative about why they're alone or why relationships don't work, framing you as the one who got away rather than as someone they pushed away through their own dysfunction. Some avoidants who develop genuine respect for someone who left and stayed away will eventually reach out months or years later, often when they've hit some crisis or transition that makes them reflect on their patterns or when they're feeling particularly lonely. This reach out might be framed as an apology or as an attempt at amends or simply as wanting to reconnect. But unless substantial work has been done in the interim, unless they can demonstrate concrete changes in their capacity and patterns, this reach out is not offering anything different than what was available before. The respect they feel doesn't translate into changed behavior or increased capacity unless it's accompanied by sustained therapeutic work and genuine commitment to growth. Why breaking no contact would destroy everything you've built. The most critical understanding about the avoidant person's increased respect for you is that this respect and everything positive it represents in terms of your dignity and their perception of you is fragile and dependent on your continued maintenance of no contact. Breaking no contact would immediately destroy the foundation of their respect and would undo the psychological work you've done in leaving and staying away. Understanding specifically why breaking no contact is so destructive helps reinforce your commitment to maintaining your boundaries, regardless of curiosity about whether they've changed or desire to see if the relationship could work now. Breaking no contact destroys the scarcity that increased your value in the avoidant person's perception. The moment you reach out, you're available again. You're no longer the person who is gone, who couldn't be accessed, who moved on. You're back to being available. And the avoidant person system will immediately register this shift and devalue you accordingly. The scarcity that made you seem so valuable disappears the instant you demonstrate you're still accessible. This shift happens quickly and unconsciously, reverting to the old dynamic where your availability reduces your value in their distorted perception. Breaking no contact communicates that you were waiting all along, that your no contact was a strategy or temporary withdrawal rather than a genuine boundary. The avoidant person will recognize that despite appearing to move on, despite seeming strong enough to stay away, you are actually still thinking about them, still attached, still available under the surface. This recognition confirms their original assessment that you needed them more than they needed you, that you couldn't actually move on, that you were waiting, even if you weren't overtly pursuing. The strength you demonstrated through your absence is revealed as a performance rather than genuine forward movement, and the respect based on that perceived strength evaporates. Breaking no contact proves your boundaries were negotiable, that your leaving wasn't as final as it appeared, that you can be convinced or circumstances can be created that bring you back despite the patterns that drove you away in the first place. The avoidant person learns from this that your boundaries don't have to be respected, that if they wait long enough, or if they reach out at the right moment, or if they say the right things, you'll break your own boundaries and make yourself available again. This lesson reduces their respect for you and actually makes them less likely to treat you well if you reconnect, because they've learned you'll tolerate poor treatment and come back anyway.